Hi, I'm Deanne Akers-Lance from Canada Abroad, and today we're going to be talking about the 10 most common mistakes that people make when using the Canadian Express Entry immigration system. So we're going to be going through from number 10 down to number 1. So you want to make sure that you stay tuned to see the most common issue that people have with Express Entry, and it's definitely the most important. So let's start with number 10. Number 10 is Express Entry is a lottery system. So a lot of people think that with the Express Entry system, if you enter, you stand the same chance as anybody else of being selected, that it's just random in the way that they select people. But this is not true. People who are selected from the Express Entry system, they're strictly selected based on their comprehensive ranking system score. So if your score is too low and it's nowhere near the people that are being selected, then you don't stand a chance of receiving an invitation to apply and getting to immigrate. So it's not like some other systems like the green card lottery for the United States, where it is really a random selection. With this, it's the highest scoring candidates are picked before anybody else. Number 9 is a one that we see a lot with married couples. It's the fact that they think that their national occupational classification code is the most important thing on their profile. So yes, with Express Entry, depending on the category that you're applying under, your occupation code might have to be at a certain level. So OA or B is typically what they might call it. That's managerial, something that requires some university or college or special training. But as long as you're in one of those categories, one is not given preference over the other. So let's say you have a married couple. One is we'll just say administrative assistant, and the other one is a software engineer. If this administrative assistant has a higher comprehensive ranking system score, they're going to be picked before the software engineer, regardless of which skill they think is in need in Canada, because again, it's all about your comprehensive ranking system score. The only thing that could happen sometimes if both, the partners have lower scores than if they were looking at potential provincial nominations or job offers, then the code might come into play a little bit more depending on which areas are looking for what skills. But in terms of Express Entry itself and the way that people are selected, the code does not trump your comprehensive ranking system score. Number 8 is quite important, and it's a very easy sort of mistake to make. So a lot of people, when they're completing their Express Entry profile, they'll see that there is a section for their information and then their spouse's information, but they don't see any section for children. So some people believe incorrectly that their children are excluded from their application if they were to receive an invitation to apply. This is not true. So anyone who is applying through Express Entry, you can include your spouse, and that can be, common law spouse as well, and your dependent children under the age of 22. It's just that with the Express Entry profile itself, they're just asking you any of the questions that will give you points towards your comprehensive ranking system score. And with children, they don't add points, they don't take away points, so they don't ask any of those questions. It's only if you do receive an invitation to apply and you're going ahead with your permanent residency application, at that stage, they will ask for your children's details and information. So they will be included with you. And if you're successful and are issued with permanent residency, your children will get it along with you. Number 7 is some people believe that if you go through the Express Entry system, you're going to be restricted to the occupation that you can work in Canada. So let's say that you create your Express Entry profile and your main occupation code that you've used to be assessed under is software engineer, again, just as an example. And when you get to Canada, you decide you don't want to do that anymore. You completely want to change occupations. That's fine. Just because software engineer is the occupation that you used for Express Entry profile and got the points from, once you get to Canada, you can work in any occupation that you would like. You're not going to be just restricted to that occupation. So a lot of people think, I don't want to do this anymore. I can't apply because I'm going to be stuck with this occupation code when I get to Canada. And it's just not true. So as long as you have the points required, even if it's an occupation you don't want to work in once you get to Canada, you can still use it to get the maximum amount of points possible. But once you get to Canada, you can change your occupation. Number 6 is Express Entry will restrict where I can live in Canada. So this is true on one point. People who are going through the Express Entry system, It's only for people who want to live outside of Quebec. If you want to move to Quebec directly, they have their own immigration system. So there's an extra step involved where you would basically need the equivalent of a nomination from Quebec before you could apply for permanent residency. If you didn't have that and you tried to move to Quebec initially, you would have issues. Also with express entry, if you said that you were going to live in Quebec, your application can also be refused because it's just not used for Quebec. The other thing though with this question is that people think, okay, if I get selected, maybe the government is going to send me directly to Alberta, or they're going to send me to Saskatchewan. If you've been chosen from the express entry system and you've been given an invitation to apply based on your comprehensive ranking system score, you get to choose where you want to live when you arrive in Canada. You're not going to be told that you have to move to this city or this province. The only time that comes into play is if you apply to be a provincial nominee and you receive a nomination from a specific province in Canada. Then the expectation is, yes, you are going to move to that province and live and work in that province. But if you're selected strictly based on your score and you didn't have a provincial nomination, then no, you're not going to be told where you need to live. It's absolutely your choice. Number 5 is people believe that you have to have a job offer in order to apply through the express entry system. And it's a very common misconception, and it's easy to see why. You don't have to have a job offer to apply through the express entry system. It's absolutely, not required. But what happens is in some cases, if people have a low comprehensive ranking system score, the only way for them to end up receiving an invitation to apply would be if they had extra points from a job offer. So it's not required to get into the system, but for some people, it's going to be required to ensure they get enough points to be able to immigrate successfully. And for people under the Federal Skilled Trades Program, one of the requirements is either that you have that job offer of a year or longer, or you have a Canadian trade certificate. So for people who can't get the Canadian trade certificate, then yes, the job offer would be a requirement. But in some cases, you don't need it. It's very specific cases that it would be required, but it doesn't mean that it's mandatory. It's just that you might be using it to increase your comprehensive ranking system score. Number 4 is some people believe that everyone can apply for a provincial nomination, that it's just a given that anybody who goes through express entry can go ahead and get a provincial nomination. Unfortunately, this is not true. Most of the provinces right now do require a job offer. They might, have 5 or more sub-programs under their provincial program, but if you go through the fine print, a lot of them do require a job offer right now. The provinces that don't require a job offer, some of them want to see that you have a certain comprehensive ranking system score. You might have to have worked in a certain occupation, or maybe the occupation code that you are working in or that you're claiming points under is restricted in that province. So it means they will not choose you because of that occupation code. Some of the provinces that want to see a connection, so maybe that you have family there, you've worked or studied there before, all of them are different and unique. But in some cases, people might be able to apply to more than one provincial program, and others might not be eligible for any of them. So before, going ahead with the process, spending money on language tests, education assessments, just assuming you can get a provincial nomination, it's worth investigating which programs you actually qualify for. And is it something that is, random, or do you stand a very good chance of receiving that nomination? Because again, not everyone's going to be eligible to receive one, and some people might not even be eligible to be considered for one. Number 3, and coming back to provincial nominations, some people think that you have to have a provincial nomination in order to apply through express entry. No, you don't have to have a provincial nomination to apply through express entry. In most cases, the way that it works, if you're getting a provincial nomination and it's tied to the express entry system, you would first have to get into express entry and then apply for a provincial nomination if you're eligible. And the reason that some people say that it's absolutely mandatory is, again, those people with a really low comprehensive ranking system score need that provincial nomination in order to get the extra points to guarantee that they get selected. Because a provincial nomination will give you 600 extra comprehensive ranking system points, And for most people, that's going to push them well above what they need to get that invitation to apply. So no, it's not mandatory, but in some cases, people need that in order to get enough points to be chosen. But it's not mandatory that you have one to enter the express entry system. Number two, which is very important, is if you submit a profile through express entry, you are guaranteed to get to immigrate to Canada. And unfortunately, this is definitely not the case. There are many, many people who create and submit express entry profiles who never receive an invitation to apply and never get to immigrate to Canada. So when you're investigating using the express entry system, you really want to see what your comprehensive ranking system score would be. See if it's going to be high enough to be competitive that you actually would be selected. And if it's too low, look at, what is realistic. Could you potentially get a job offer from an employer in Canada who typically can show that they couldn't find a Canadian to fill that position? Or are you eligible for any provincial nominations to boost your score in that way? Because we see a lot of the time that people, go do their language test, get their education assessed, go into the system, maybe they have a score in the low 300s, and they expect that they're going to get this invitation to apply, and it's just a matter of time. It's not the case. Some people will never get an invitation to apply, and they will just sit there and maybe renew their profile, but they'll never end up getting selected. So it's definitely not a case of, get your documents together, enter the system, eventually you'll get to immigrate. It's maybe investigate what your chances are, how high your score would be, and is there any way to boost the score before going ahead and spending the money on the language test and the education assessment. And the number one mistake that people make with express entry is believing that everyone is eligible to apply through express entry. And again, unfortunately, this is not the case. So express entry is for people who meet the criteria as a federal skilled worker, federal skilled trades, and the Canadian experience class. If you do not meet the minimum criteria of one of these three programs, if you go to try to create an express entry profile, you're going to be found to be ineligible. So with the Canadian experience class, if you don't have that 1 year of Canadian work experience in the last 3, you won't be eligible for that program. With the federal skilled trades, unless you have a Canadian trade certificate, or you have a job offer in Canada that is from one employer for 12 months or longer, or 2 employers of 6 months each, and they are supported by valid, approved labor market impact assessments, you wouldn't qualify for that program. And with the federal skilled worker, unless you had at least 1 year of full-time paid work experience in an O, A, or B occupation, and you can get 67 points or higher on the federal skilled worker point system, you won't meet those criteria either. So some people, when they're assessing themselves under the federal skilled worker, might think they can get to that 67, but maybe age becomes a problem, or their language test results didn't go as expected, and that brings them down even 1 or 2 points. They could fall below that 67 points required. So the other thing in some cases, if you don't have a qualification after high school of at least 1 year or longer, typically you won't have enough points to qualify. So it's very important, again, a lot of information out there. If you just do your language test, get your degrees assessed or your high school assessed, you can get into the system. It's not true. You're going to want to double check that you meet the minimum criteria of one of the 3 programs that qualifies for express entry before spending any money on the process and going ahead with it. So again, not everyone is eligible for express entry. You're going to want to do your research and make sure that you qualify under one of the applicable programs before going ahead with anything in the process. Thanks for tuning in. And if you like the video and the information that we provide, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, as we're always posting new information. And every Friday we do FAQ Friday, where if you have questions, you can post them in the comments box and we answer them for you.